Men don't deserve to breathe the same air as women. They are evil. Don't ever trust men, else you will find yourself digging your own grave. If you think I am bitter, then just wait till 5 years from now and watch that man ruin you totally. Girls, never lower your guard for any man, because that was exactly how my ex-husband got to me. He took everything away from me just because of a tiny 20-year-old bitch who couldn't keep her legs closed. But this is not a story about him destroying me. This is a story about what I built from the ashes he left behind, and how I made him watch every single second of it. My name is Serena, and 5 years ago I was the kind of woman that made other women uncomfortable. Not because I was threatening, but because I was too good, too soft, too available. I cooked from scratch every Sunday. I prayed for that man every single morning. I turned down promotions because he said the travel would strain our marriage. I gave Daniel 12 years of my life, saw 12 years of my best self, my best energy, my best years, and he handed them to a girl who was still figuring out how to do her own laundry. I want you to picture the woman I was before all of this. I'm talking about a woman who cried at other people's weddings, a woman who kept a journal and wrote down things she was grateful for every night before bed, a woman who genuinely, deeply, embarrassingly believed that if you loved someone hard enough and took care of them well enough, they would never have a reason to hurt you. That was me. That was the woman Daniel married, and that was the woman Daniel decided was too boring to come home to. I found out on a Tuesday. I had come back early from a work trip. My flight landed ahead of schedule, and I remember feeling so happy because I had missed him. I actually missed him. I had bought him cologne from the duty-free shop. I still remember the weight of that bag in my hand when I walked through the front door and called his name. He didn't answer. I heard sounds coming from upstairs, and I want you to understand something. In the moment before I opened that door, some part of me already knew. My body knew before my brain was willing to accept it. My hand was shaking on the door handle. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I opened the door anyway. I won't describe what I saw in detail. I think you already know. What I will tell you is the part that broke something permanent inside of me. It wasn't even the girl. It wasn't even Daniel. It was my robe, my burgundy silk robe, the one Daniel had bought me for our 10th anniversary. That girl was wearing it like she owned it, like she had already replaced me, like I was already a woman of the past, and nobody had thought to inform me. I closed the door quietly. I walked back downstairs. I sat at my own dining table, and I stared at the wall. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there while something inside me went very, very still. Like the moment before a storm, when everything goes completely silent and the air changes, and you know that whatever comes next is going to be nothing like what came before. Daniel came downstairs 20 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt, and when he saw me sitting there, his face did something I had never seen it do in 12 years of marriage. It collapsed, just for a second. Then he tried to start talking, and I stopped him with one question. "How long, Daniel?" He said 2 years. 2 years. While I was cooking his food, and praying for his protection, and turning down opportunities for the sake of our marriage, he had been lying to my face for 2 years. I looked at him, and I felt something I did not expect to feel. I did not feel rage. I did not feel devastation. I felt something cold and clear and purposeful settle over me, like a second skin. And I made a decision in that moment that I have never gone back on. I told him to get out of my house, and I meant it in more ways than one. The divorce took 8 months. During those 8 months, I cried exactly once. I was in the shower, and it hit me all at once. The grief of it, the sheer waste of it. And I sat down on the floor of that shower, and I let myself feel it for exactly as long as it needed. Then I stood up, turned the water cold, and got back to work. Because I had decided that the only acceptable response to what Daniel did to me was to become someone he could never have imagined when he chose that girl over me. I was going to build something so undeniable, so powerful, so completely mine, that every single thing he thought he had taken from me would come back to me multiplied. I hired the sharpest divorce attorney I could find, a woman named Linda, who looked at me across her desk on our first meeting and said, "How much damage do you want to do?" I told her I didn't want damage. I wanted reconstruction. My reconstruction. And whatever fell apart during that process was simply not built to last. It was during this period that I started building my consulting business. I had always been good at it, but I had spent years playing small so Daniel wouldn't feel threatened. That was over now. I worked like a woman who had something to prove. Because I did. Not to him, to myself, to the version of me that had made herself smaller for over a decade. I worked to prove to her that it had not been wasted, that she could still become everything she had quietly dreamed of. And then, about a year into all of this, I walked into a hotel lobby at a business conference and collided with a man named Marcus. I want to be very clear about something. I was not looking for Marcus. I was not open to Marcus. I had made a decision about men, and that decision was a hard and permanent no. I had looked myself in the mirror and buried the part of me that trusted easily, and I was not in the business of resurrection. Marcus was an inconvenience. A tall, irritating, entirely too perceptive inconvenience, who bent down to pick up my scattered papers and looked up at me with eyes that felt like they were reading something I hadn't said out loud. He told me I had walked into him. I told him he had appeared out of nowhere like a problem. He said, "Like a problem?" And I said, "Like an inconvenience." And I walked away with my papers and my composure, and I told myself that was the end of that. It was not the end of that. He came to my panel the next morning, some front row, and he didn't watch me the way men usually watch women when they find them attractive. He wasn't consuming me, he was listening. Every word I said, he was filing it away somewhere, taking it seriously. When it was over, he walked up to me and told me I had articulated something he had been trying to figure out for 6 months. He wasn't flattering me. He was just telling me the truth. I could tell the difference by then. The difference between a man performing interest and a man who was actually, genuinely, inconveniently interested. I walked away again. And then I stopped, just before the exit, and I said, "Dinner tonight, strictly professional. I don't do anything that isn't." And I left before he could respond in a way that would make me feel something. We sat at dinner for 4 hours. 4 hours? The staff started stacking chairs around us. We talked about business, and then we talked about everything else, and there was this tension between us the entire time that neither of us acknowledged, but both of us felt. It wasn't aggressive. It was quiet and warm, and it sat in the center of my chest, and every time he said my name or his hand moved near mine on the table, without touching it, I felt it pull tighter. I drove home and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I went inside. I was so angry at myself. I had a wall. I had built that wall brick by brick with my own hands and my own pain, and this man had walked past the first 3 layers of it just by listening to me speak at a conference panel, and I did not appreciate that at all. We kept meeting. We called them meetings. They were not meetings. And one night, we were in my office going over documents late, and we reached for the same paper at the same time, and our hands met and neither of us pulled back. We just stayed there for a moment in the silence. And I felt it everywhere, not just in my hand, everywhere, like something waking up that I had been very deliberately keeping asleep. I pulled back. I stood up. I put distance between us, and I told him not to do whatever he was doing. He said he wasn't doing anything. I told him he was doing everything. And he asked me why that was a problem, and I told him the truth. I told him I was terrified of him. Not of who he was. Of what I felt when I was near him. Of what it meant that after everything I had been through, and everything I had decided about men and walls and never again, this specific man was making me reconsider everything. He reached over and tucked my hair behind my ear like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he said he was terrified of me too, and that it seemed like a good place to start. I didn't kiss him that night, but I stopped lying to myself about wanting to. And for a woman who had spent a year and a half being at war with her own softness, that was enormous. But before I go any further with Marcus, I need to finish the story about Daniel. Because while all of this was happening quietly on one side of my life, I had been building something on the other side. Something patient. Something precise. something that was almost ready. I walked into a boardroom 14 months after I found him in our bedroom, and I sat across from Daniel and his lawyers and his new business partners, and I opened a folder. I told them the house was handled. Then I told them about the investment portfolio, the one with the fine print on his 2019 business registration that tied several of its assets to my name, because Daniel had needed my credit history to secure the initial loan and had clearly forgotten about that detail in the years since. Then I told them about the clients. 3 of his largest clients, who I had been quietly, professionally, and completely legitimately building relationships with over the past year, who had agreed to transfer their retainers to my firm as of that morning. Then I told him about the building. I had purchased the building where his new office was located through a holding company 6 months earlier. His lease was up in 30 days. The room was completely silent. Daniel looked at me like he didn't recognize me. And he was right, he didn't. The woman sitting across from him had never existed when he was married to me, because I had spent 12 years making myself smaller so he would feel big. He asked me why I was doing this, and I leaned forward and I told him. I told him about the 12 years. I told him about the babies we never had, because he always said not yet, and I had trusted him. I told him about the promotions I turned down, and the silk robe, and the 20 months of lies delivered to my face by a man who slept next to me every night. I told him I had taken his empire because he had taken my 20s, and I considered that a fair trade. Then I stood up, picked up my folder, and smiled at him. Not with anger. I was completely done with anger by that point. I smiled at him with the particular piece of a woman who has finished something and knows it. I told him I hoped she was worth it. Genuinely. Because she was all he had left. I walked out and the door closed behind me without a sound. I stood outside the building and I took one long breath, and my hands were shaking a little. Not from fear, from release, from the feeling of something finally being completely, permanently done. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus asking how it went. I looked at the message. I looked up at the sky. And I typed back 2 words. I'm free. Yeah, he replied in 3 seconds. He said he had been waiting for that. He said dinner tonight, and he was done pretending it was professional. I laughed standing on that pavement outside that building. A full laugh. The kind I had forgotten I was capable of. And I went to dinner. I want to be clear about something before I finish this chapter. Marcus did not save me. I want that understood. I had already saved myself before he became anything real to me. I had already done the work. I had already built the company and won the war and become the woman I needed to become. Marcus did not rescue anything. What Marcus did was show up after all of that and love the woman I had actually become, rather than the smaller version I had been performing for 12 years. And he had the sense and the patience to wait while I figured out that I was allowed to let him. Daniel lost the business, lost the clients, couldn't renew his lease. Last I heard, the girl left him 8 months after our divorce was finalized, moved on to someone with better financial prospects. I will not pretend I did not laugh when I heard that. I laughed for a long time. I made my first million at 36. I moved into an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and I stand at those windows sometimes with a glass of wine, and I look at the city below me, and I feel something I don't have a single word for. It isn't just happiness. It's the specific feeling of a woman who was counted out, who was discarded, who was replaced in her own home by a girl in her own robe, and who decided, quietly and deliberately, and without any drama, to become completely, terrifyingly untouchable. So yes, maybe I am bitter. I was, for a little while. But here is what nobody tells you about bitterness when you're a woman with a plan. It is the cleanest fuel there is. And baby, I burned.